Thank you, Phil. I don't have quite as many accolades to my name as Cary does, but we're going to work a double act. So there's going to be a little bit of Slido today. So for those of you that perhaps have used it in the previous sessions, get your phones out and we'll have a look at how to do it. But we're going to have a couple of sessions where we'll get a couple of sections where we're going to look at Slido, and we'll give you the details on there in a second. On your seat, on some of your seats, and if they're not on your seats and you'd like a copy, you can get them, come and have a look at our stand outside there. We're going to focus a little bit on some research that Cary and we did together at the beginning of this year, where we basically surveyed 5,000 of UK employees and 1,000 employers to examine the state of the UK's financial health. And we didn't just sort of look at the sort of what. We looked into the whys, but we also did specific measurement. And so through the talk today, we're going to pull a bit of pieces out of that, and Cary will comment on it. We've gone through these, and you know who we are. We thought we'd start before getting into financial well-being. Financial is, if we simplify well-being into its three component pieces of physical, mental or emotional and financial. Financial is one of the components. But we thought we'd start by looking at the impact of the workplace on well-being. So for those of you that do have your Slido open, please, this is the time to have a look at it. We thought we'd say, for you guys, how do you think, how do you feel your job? How does it affect your well-being? So if we could switch to Slido, brilliant. Positively or negatively? Overall.
Somebody keeps changing their mind. Did you notice that? I don't know if it's negative or positive. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, don't worry about following the crowd. Just say what you feel. And actually, interestingly, if we think of you who are in the audience, you know, you are heads off. You're heading up wellbeing in your organisations. You're part of the wellbeing initiative. So maybe think about how differently you feel about it to your colleagues at work. How would they feel about it? I think that's probably rounded out pretty much. 3/4 think it's a positive thing, and about a quarter think it's actually negative. So again, going back to who we've got in the audience, given that this is your day job, I don't know, I find that quite an interesting thing. Cary, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's about right. I think about, you know, you're talking probably more about senior management here,
yeah,
who tend to be more in control, ergo, or you think you're in control. I'm not sure you are in control, by the way. Any of us are in control, really. Just watch Brexit. So I think the evidence is, we're going to talk about the evidence as to why well-being and stress has become quite big now in industry.
Yeah.
But I think that's about right. If you're talking about 70-30,
yeah,
particularly for senior managers, the further down the system you go, the more the negatives go up, the less people have control and autonomy at work.
Yeah. And I guess the fact that you've come to today's Congress means that this is something you're focusing on, something you're interested in. But again, given your status in your organisation, you know, that is something which tells us that there's something there to be fixed. This is if that amount of negativity, there's something there to be fixed. So let's have a look at what we can do around that. Why do we think organisations like yours are focusing on well-being, and why now? Cary?
Okay, where did this all start? I was talking to a guy, an HR director in a bank a few years ago. I said, why are you buggers doing work on well-being? You never did anything before the recession. And he said two words, and I thought I should write a book about it. He said, regrettable turnover. I said, well, that's a great concept. What is it? He says, we can't afford to lose anybody. Think of what's happened in the finance sector during the recession. 30 to 40% of people lost their job, right? So there were fewer people doing more work, feeling more job insecure, working longer hours, right? And then he said, what's important to us is we want to retain, particularly he was talking about the millennials. How do we retain people who I think some of you will call snowflakes? They're not snowflakes. You know, the snowflake generation, the millennials, have it right. The older generations like me shouldn't tolerate bad jobs. shouldn't tolerate organizations don't create a well-being environment, right? They bugger off, and rightly so. So effectively what he was talking about was talent retention. We're so mean and lean, how do we retain the people we already have? So that was how it started. And of course, then there are all sorts of figures you're going to see in a little while: sickness absence rates, presenteeism, labor turnover, a whole load of factors, and productivity. These are the drivers. So why well-being is big time, and apparently I was talking to Phil, and Phil said, so you've been doing this for 4 years, Phil. He says, yeah, you won't believe it, Cary. 30% increase each year on the number of people turning up to a well-being thing. And I'm involved with the CIPD. We just had a conference called the Festival of Work last week. We had 10,000 people there, and it was all about good work. 10,000 people. It's huge, and it was in Olympia. So this has now become, I think, in my view, it's become bottom line. But we'll look at the figures in a minute.
Yeah, and I think picking up on the, as you say, the millennials piece there, as Cary said, acquisition is a key piece. You all know what time and money is spent on acquiring talent. And particularly with the younger generation, you know, it's not just about reward and it's not just about benefits. It's about how you're going to help them live the life they want. So it's that work-life balance, which I think is really important. So Cary's had a look at that from a sort of a non-financial perspective, but there's a lot that's gone on in the financial world, in the world of work. If we look at things like auto-enrollment, we now have more people in defined contribution pensions than defined benefit pensions. So that switch. The reduction in lifetime and annual allowances, causing more people to be actually effectively blocked out of saving into a pension. People struggling to get onto the housing market, you know, fundamental criteria for most people in their lives. So that's at an individual level, and most of this is moving away from employers sorting it out to them, and it's falling onto the shoulders of individual employees, and they feel ill-equipped to deal with this. They feel ill-equipped to understand their choices and to make good decisions. And then flipping it back to the corporates themselves, to the employers themselves. In difficult economic times, everybody's asking, you know, what can we get with what we have? So it's really going back to basics and looking at the amount that's being spent on that employee value proposition and what they're getting back from it. How are they making the most of that relationship with their employees? How are they getting employees to be fully engaged and fully productive and happy at work? And it's also recognition, and we'll see in the next slide, that definitive link between poor financial well-being and poorer business performance. And then the final thing on the financial side really is that, as Cary said, with the increased interest in well-being, it's a recognition that actually if you don't have all three components, all three pillars of a well-being strategy inside your organisation, you cannot, as an organisation and your employees as individuals, you cannot obtain financial, or you cannot obtain health, because they're codependent. A lot of people have anxiety that's related to worrying about money. If anxiety and worry goes on for long periods of time, it may impact physical health. These three things don't exist in isolation. They are dependent on one another. So if all three strategies don't exist, then you cannot have well-being overall without something attributed to all three areas. We said that there was a direct link. Cary said that's a bottom line issue. We said that there's a direct link between well-being and business performance. Cary, do you want to talk about
well-being? Yeah, I mean, I think we know about the sickness absence rates. Last year in 2018, HSE came up with these figures of 57%. Of all the sickness absence in the UK, 6 out of 10 people are off with stress, either depression, anxiety, or stress. That's the biggest it's ever been before. And I think it's a lot about insecurity, how people are managed, you know, because we also know the research. We know what drives this. It's not new research. We know you guys have really lovely line managers. Your boss is wonderful, tells you every day what a good job you're doing, manage you by praise and reward, never fault finds with you. No, you know, it's wonderful, isn't it? Maybe not every day he or she doesn't do that. Maybe once a year, you know, he says, what a nice job you're doing. So we have the issues that drive the stats, and the stats are high sickness absence. Also, our productivity per capita, very poor. We're 7th in the G7, 17th in the G20. Presenteeism rates are very high. And that is to say, even though sickness absence, 57% of it is for stress at work, double the number of people turn up to work but deliver no added value, right? Because they're job dissatisfied, or they're ill but turn up to work because they're worried about it getting on their HR record. So presenteeism is double the cost, and it amounts to about $15 billion a year. And that's even more insidious, but it's, by the way, it's measurable. But not only are these figures worrying, but we also have the evidence of what we can do about it. And when we look at that evidence, if you intervene and do something about changing your line managers, making sure your line manager, your boss, has higher EQ, emotional intelligence. Of course, in your sector, everybody has emotional intelligence, right? Your bosses are really good, they have very good social skills, but you see outside your sector, that might not be the case. And we have a problem in the UK with line managers. They just don't have they're good technically, but not necessarily good emotionally. So we have in fact, what we should have on the door of every office is, as you walk in, your manager is potentially dangerous to your health, like we have in a cigarette packet. But you get the message. The point is, well-being isn't just mindfulness at lunch. It's not sushi at your desk. If you're looking at well-being, you have to change the culture of the organization, and that's doable.
And looking at it again from the financial side particularly, it's been known that poor financial health is linked to poor business performance for years. 2014, the Barclays YouGov research showed it linked to that. 2017, the CIPD showed that this research linked to that. It showed that people were losing sleep worrying about money, therefore they can't be effective at work. It showed that people were at work taking time off to deal with their finances. It showed that people were absent from work because of financial pressures. And this is all coming to roost on business and business performance. And this is not just about happiness, this is about effectiveness at work. In the latest research that we did there, employers recognise that people worry about money. So 88% of the employers surveyed said that they believe that their staff worry about money. 77% of their staff, employees, said they worry about money to the extent it affects their performance at work. That is a massive number of your colleagues who have said to you, we are not doing our job to the fullest extent. Now imagine the impact of that on our GDP and our productivity. If we only shifted that dial by 5%, 10%, 15%, as a country, imagine the impact of that on our output. It would be phenomenal. Going back again to the employers themselves, we said, okay, what issues are you seeing currently, actually experiencing as a result of poor financial well-being? And that green box on the bottom right there, they're seeing 48% fewer retirees. So that's 48% of organisations are seeing fewer people retiring because people are feeling that they cannot afford to do so. Especially prominent in difficult economic times, people are more cautious and they just push those decisions down the line. 22% are saying they are actually seeing lower productivity linked to poor financial well-being. Again, massive numbers, massive numbers. 22% going back to that talent retention, loss of talent, that regrettable talent loss, and higher absenteeism. So big issues. If anybody needs to understand how to put a plan together to review your financial well-being strategy, some of these figures are very powerful things to use. One of the things that we see when we practice with organisations, Cary and myself, is people thinking about, well, how am I going to measure this? What can I look at? What measures can I look at? From a corporate health perspective, Cary?
Well, I mean, these are outcome measures. So we can measure sickness absence. By the way, we can measure presenteeism now. We have the tools to do it. You can measure the usage of EAPs. They don't tend to be very high usage anyway, roughly about 10, 12% max. By the way, that could be linked to job insecurity too. So if the rates of mental ill health are fairly high in the UK, or in most countries, by the way, not just in the UK, why aren't they going to get counseling through an EAP? And it's because they may think that even though it's a confidential service, that it's not confidential, that somehow somebody will find out. Productivity measures, engagement measures, you can measure all those kinds of things. But what is also important in this arena is to get the individual employee's perception of your organization. And well-being audits are very common now. I mean, I have a University of Manchester spin-off company called Roberts and Cooper. That's what we do. We go into a company and we do a well-being audit, break all the data down, give it to the company, and then you say, that you need to do that over there, and don't touch anything else. Don't have meditation at lunch for the rest of them. Because I have real concerns about the low-hanging fruit approach to well-being. The low-hanging fruit to well-being is mindfulness for an hour, mental health first aiders. Now, that might be useful. I'm not saying you shouldn't have those. I'm just saying that doesn't make you a well-being culture to have that. That's low-hanging fruit stuff. What is significant is your culture. What is your management style as an organization? Do you have long hours? Do you let people work flexible working, which the evidence suggests really increases job satisfaction, etc. It is a structural thing. This should be a corporate structure thing, rather than just a series of little minor things. So on the left-hand side, we can measure the outcome of a lack of well-being culture, and we can also measure when you do interventions, when you find out something's wrong. So, for example, if you do resilience training or emotional EQ training for line managers from shop floor to top floor, and that includes the very top people too. If you do that, what's the impact of that? Is it making a difference? Because I think that is really fundamental. So that, I think, is really important. Then there are the financial indicators. That's an area that really hasn't been touched much. And a lot of organizations, people are frightened of saying, well, in the finance sector, for example, you don't want to admit that you're not coping, do you? To your colleagues, to your organization, to anybody. You can't, in the police too. You look at a lot of public sector people, they don't want to say that they're not coping financially. So there's a lot of contexts, a lot of sectors where it's really difficult to say, I've got financial problems. And no question about it, if you've got financial problems, it's going to affect your stress levels at work, it's going to affect your performance. So you got to look at the whole package. And EAPs some of them provide some financial help for people, but the majority are basically psychological counseling.
And on the financial side, there's a lot already there. There's a lot that exists, and I would encourage you all to make your current providers do their job properly. And that's not me criticizing them, but they have access to some really good insight and really good information, and they should be giving that to you. So Cary said about the EAP. The EAP isn't just about usage, but it's what are the trends. So even if there's only 12% using it, within that 12%, are people seeking financial counselling? Has that gone up? It's the year-on-year views. You need to sort of get the underlying, what are they asking about? What counselling are they seeking? But more than that, look at your benefits take-up. If you have a benefits consultant, get them to give you reports on a periodic basis looking at the changes. How many people are accessing your pensions portal, for example? How many people are going in and actually making changes to their contribution levels? How many people are using the pension modeler? All of these things, they can give you that information, and if they're not doing, they should be. It gives you good insight. It gives you insight as to what is engaging people and what further you need to look at. So absolutely go and do that. But financial health is something that can be measured down to the penny. If each of us today went and sat with a financial advisor, we would come out of that meeting, they would have examined our financial health across all 7 areas of personal finance. There are only 7, they would have talked to us about all 7 areas. We would leave that meeting knowing exactly where we stood. We would know the areas where we're doing okay, we would know the areas where we need to do better, and we would know the areas of real risk. And in each of those areas, we would have an action plan that either we took away and did ourselves, or we would ask the advisor to do. When we were putting this research together, using all of the knowledge that Cary has about corporate wellbeing, and using our knowledge as a financial wellbeing provider, both in terms of financial education and financial advice, we tried to replicate that meeting with an advisor. And we measured it specifically and gave it a score, a bit like a credit score. And we said, out of 100, what would this individual's financial health be overall and in each of those 7 areas of personal financial health? And that can be measured at an individual level so they can see it themselves. It can be measured at enterprise level across an organisation. So for an organisation looking at their financial wellbeing strategy, that will identify the areas where they absolutely need to bolster, not just the low-hanging fruit, but actually their key risk areas to help direct and put attention towards that. And actually, when we did that measure across those 5,000 employees and 1,000 employers, the UK's financial wellbeing health is at 54 out of 100. So that tells us we've got a long way to go. We asked exactly the same questions of the employers as we did of the employees, and we said to them, what do you think your employees think about this or their different areas? Employers measured 71. Now that's a really, really interesting one, because is that the reason why financial wellbeing is lagging behind the other two in terms of focus in the workplace? Because actually employers are underestimating significantly the issue. So we looked at this across, as I say, all 7 areas of personal financial wealth, and there's an 8th there, which is how much people worry about money. So even if they had fantastic financial well-being, some people are worriers, so they could worry about it anyway. I don't know if it's right, I don't know if it's fantastic, I'm still going to worry about it. And you can see there the differential overall, that 71 overall versus 53, massive differential. And you can see it across each of those 8 areas. And I think some of that is really surprising, but not surprising probably. The area that employers or employees were closest was around debt. That was the only area where there was any degree of real closeness. But look at the worst performing areas. Some basic stuff, budgeting and planning. The most basic fundamental building block of personal financial well-being, budgeting and planning. That is one of the lowest scores. Protection. Tax. Now, if you think inside your organisation, and forgetting group risk for a moment, budgeting and planning, protection and tax, who in your organisation is going to talk to your employees about those 3 areas? None of your providers will, because there isn't a product at the end of them. It's not a product, it's a concept, it's a strategy. So again, very interesting. We thought again we'd ask you about Slido before we go on to our final slide. There's a lot of talk about, as Cary said, people are not frightened to admit where they're up to in their financial health journey. Who wouldn't you, which of those key groups would you not be prepared to share details of your personal finances with? Oh, are we switching to Slido? Sorry. Yeah. Interesting. Inside the workplace, many workplaces operate their reward system on the premise that you will not talk to your colleagues about what you're being paid. Because if you did, it would cause all sorts of HR issues, right? There's lots of organisations out there who do not have comparative, equalised, transparent reward systems. That's not a criticism, it's just the way that organisation's grown up over history. They've acquired businesses, they've had to bring businesses in, etc. I understand that. It exists in our business too. So it's not surprising. Cary, interesting?
Yeah, I think the colleagues is fascinating, isn't it? It's about comparative stuff. I don't want them to know what either the problems I have or where I actually am earning more than they are.
Yeah.
So it's all that kind of stuff. Employers, yeah, you'd expect employers. You don't want your employer to know too much about it as well. All of the above, yeah, that's pretty high. On everybody, including your family. I'm not sure I talk to my family about my thing. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
But I think probably what we'd all expect.
Yeah, and we did that really as just to get us thinking, because for us the next slide we wanted to look at was our relationship with money. And actually, in our organisation, is money the greatest last taboo? And explore a little bit as to why that is. Cary?
Yeah, it is one of the taboos. I mean, there's a lot of taboos. I mean, mental health is still partly a stigma in the workplace, for sure. Although that's getting better because we're getting more senior people admitting they've had depression, breakdowns, and the rest of it. So we're opening up. Money is an area I think people don't like talking about. They don't like other people to know what their finances are about, or that they're not good at it, particularly if you're in the finance sector. So I think it's one of the last taboos. But I think is one that really we should surface, because if people are having trouble with their money, they're going to be stressed. If they're stressed, they're not going to be doing their work properly, which is going to cause problems for them with their line manager, which is going to get them even more stressed, and we just got a vicious circle. So I think we need to just, surface it. Should people be honest? Should an organization allow, for example, the publishing of everybody's salary, like they do in the BBC, with people over a certain level, which is quite interesting? Why not everybody? It's an interesting question. Should we? Should we be just much upfront about what everybody gets paid? And then you as a manager have to manage that process, because you have to justify why that person's getting more than that person, right? Maybe we'll move in the long term in that kind of situation. If we did, I think it would help all the money issues from surfacing, because at the moment they're not. People are not talking to their colleagues about it, nor their employer.
And I think if we step back, say 5 years and possibly 10 years, certainly 10 years, when we were looking at mental health, it wasn't talked about to the extent it is now.
No.
We're in inclusivity, we're in Pride Month, June. That wasn't around 10 years ago either. And I think organisations are recognising a responsibility to some degree, yes, responsibility, but actually that it's just good corporate behaviour and that relationship with their employees in talking about these things, in making sure that they lead the way, in making these things something that is open and to be talked about and to be debated. And I think with money, it's not about an organisation knowing exactly what people have in their bank account or whether people have debt issues or not debt issues, how much people are investing, where they're investing it.
It changes the culture too, Jeanette. So if you take a look at what's happened in the BBC by showing the gender pay gap between presenters doing roughly the same job, it's changing that culture as we speak. So maybe we need more transparency in workplaces for people to justify why people are getting paid more than other people, whether it's based on gender or it's ethnic issues or whatever the issues are. I think it's something we ought to consider. Why shouldn't we have transparency for everybody?
And I think going back to that point, I think with regard to physical health particularly, as an employer, you don't know people's BMI. You don't know whether they're on diabetes medication. You don't know whether they're on heart medication. The same goes for finances. You don't need to know that level of detail to know it's a good idea to help people deal with them better and to put good education and good advice in front of them. From our perspective, that's for us, that's a debating point. We could debate it long and hard, and we're happy to debate it in the sessions. But I don't know whether we have time for a couple of questions, guys.